Hello YouTube, in this video today I will be ranking the Star Wars animated TV shows. Now to address the elephant in the room, I had posted a video on my channel where I did rank the Star Wars animated shows, except when I went back and watched that video again, I realized, what? Somehow, for reasons I'll never understand, I completely forgot to include Bad Batch. I am baffled that I somehow in that video only talked about Visions, Tales of the Jedi, Rebels, and Clone Wars. Therefore, I deleted that video from my channel, and now I'm going to re-upload a video where I rank the animated shows, both because of the fact that in that last video I forgot to include Bad Batch, but also because when I went back and watched that video, I realized, wait a minute, the way I rank the shows here doesn't line up at all with how I ranked them in those streams that I did, where I ranked the films and TV shows combined. So in this video, I'm going to make sure that the way I rank the animated shows lines up with where I put them in that overall list which I talked about during my streams. Well, I have there's free streams I posted on my channel where I rank the films and TV shows together. So in this video today, I'm going to make sure that the way I rank the animated shows here lines up with how I ranked them during those streams. So with those disclaimers out of the way, and in last place at number 5, we have Tales of the Jedi, which is a series that I did enjoy. I think that Tales of the Jedi is a good series, but I don't think it's a great series. Part of the reason why this show is in last place is because Tales of the Jedi only has 6 episodes, and the episodes are not even that long. They're only like 10-15 minutes long. Therefore, this series is composed of shorts, not full-length episodes of television, because a full-length episode of television, I would say, is at least 20 minutes long, but these episodes here are not even 20 minutes long. They're 10 to 15 minutes long. Therefore, I'm not going to be placing this series above Rebels, Clone Wars, or Bad Batch, which are composed of full-length episodes of television. But on top of that, the other reason why I'm placing Tales of the Jedi in last place is because we only explored in this season 2 characters in depth. That would be Ahsoka Tano and Count Dooku. We explored these 2 characters in depth, but not any others. Plus, this series only focuses on the prequel era. Therefore, I feel like this series really was tame and played it safe, because there's a lot more that you could do with this idea of exploring characters through these shorts. You could explore multiple different time periods, for example, the original trilogy era, prequel trilogy era, sequel trilogy era, some other time period like the High Republic or Old Republic. You could also explore a lot of different characters rather than only 2. You also don't have to have this series be just about the Jedi and the Sith. You could explore a lot of other characters using this format. Therefore, I really hope that Disney does realize all the potential here, and therefore they do more series that use this format, that are not just simply focused in on the Jedi, not just simply focused in on the Sith, but explore a wide variety of characters and explore different time periods rather than keeping it boxed in to only one. But all that being said, though, I still enjoyed Tales of the Jedi. In particular, I enjoy the Dooku episodes a lot more than the Ahsoka episodes because Ahsoka Tano is a character that's been very well explored, whereas Dooku has not been very well explored in the films and TV shows. He doesn't have much screen time in the prequel trilogy, and you don't learn much about Dooku. You only learn the basics of his backstory. And then in the 2008 Clone Wars show, he just comes off as a one dimensional mustache twirling villain. His character is not fleshed out anymore. Now, don't get me wrong, Dooku's character in the new canon has been fleshed out more in the books and comics, particularly in the book Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray. Yeah, that book does focus more on Qui-Gon's time as Obi-Wan's master, but it does give you little glimpses of Qui-Gon's time as Dooku's apprentice. And then the book Dooku Jedi Lost really explores Dooku's character a lot more. But outside of the books and comics, Dooku had not been explored very much before Tales of the Jedi. But then this series really fleshes out Dooku's character a lot more. It fleshes out why Dooku fell to the dark side in the first place. Tragically, this series shows us that Dooku initially had good intentions, but then he was obviously corrupted by the dark side. He did have legitimate reasons to be unhappy with the Republic and the Jedi Order, but then he became a Sith, he fell to the dark side, and those initial reasons why he turned to the dark side mattered less and less as time went on. Also, I love that we get to see Yaddle have not only more screen time in Tales of the Jedi, but he actually talks. We see him fight Dooku. We see her fight Dooku, my bad. We see that Yaddle tried to reason with Dooku. She gave him a chance to come back, but tragically, Yaddle ends up being killed by Dooku. Considering that Yaddle did not have any lines of dialogue in the prequels and barely appeared in them whatsoever, it's fantastic to actually see Yaddle have a decent amount of screen time and actually talk. Now, I didn't think the Ahsoka episodes of Tales of the Jedi were bad. I didn't dislike any of them, but I didn't think they were great either. When it comes to episode 1, which shows us Ahsoka being born, and then her village realizing that Ahsoka is force sensitive, I was like, okay, this is not bad, but it's not that important to see Ahsoka being born and then her as a baby and her village realizing that she's force sensitive. That's not particularly important because we know that Ahsoka ends up becoming a Jedi. And then when it comes to the episode where we see Ahsoka training with the clones, and then we see this little moment from the Siege of Mandalore arc that we don't actually see in the Siege of Mandalore arc itself, where Rex is talking to Ahsoka right before the two of them walk into that room where all the clones are. Rex goes, "I hope all that training paid off." Ahsoka says, "Yeah, I feel the same." That's basically what the two of them said. I was like, okay, that's interesting. But at the same time, this feels more like a deleted scene or maybe deleted episode from the Clone Wars rather than an episode that should have been in this series. And then the other episode with Ahsoka that shows us her fighting off an Inquisitor, teaming up with Bail. I was like, okay, this is not bad. But the problem is this material has already been covered in a book from the new canon called Ahsoka. And this episode of Tales of the Jedi does not match that book at all. That bothers me because back when Disney took the old expanded universe, rebranded it Legends, and said, we're going to create our own canon. They said everything is going to matter, not just the films and TV shows, but also the books, comics, and video games. And yet, that unfortunately has not turned out to be the case, as it's become more and more clear as time goes on that books and comics are considered to be less important than the films and TV shows. Now, you could say that the events of this one episode of Tales of the Jedi, generally speaking, like match up with the book. You could say that when you don't look at the details, instead look only at the broad strokes, that it matches up. Okay, you're not wrong, but a lot of the details don't match up, and I'm not a fan of that, because if a book is going to ends up being retconned, then there's less of a reason anyway to read it. Obviously, you can read a Star Wars book and enjoy it on its own merits. That's definitely true. But if a book is going to end up getting retconned, then I still think there's less of a reason to read it. But moving on now to number 4, we have Star Wars Visions, which I found to be a rather interesting and fascinating experiment for the franchise. Now, there's two main reasons why Visions is being placed below Clone Wars, Rebels, and Bad Batch. First of all, as I talked about with Tales of the Jedi, Visions is also a series of shorts rather than a series of full-length episodes of television. On top of that, while Visions is very creative in certain respects, I also found the episodes in a certain way got a bit repetitive, because a good amount of the episodes deal with the Jedi and the Sith, and a good amount of them end with the lightsaber fight. So I wish the episodes had been a little bit more creative in that regard, but I really like that Disney took this chance, that they gave us this series that shows us these little glimpses, little snapshots, little visions, you could say, of other people's different interpretations of what Star Wars could be. I like how the episodes vary a lot when it comes to their visual style. For example, the first episode is in black and white. It plays out much more like a samurai film. Then episode 2 has a much more cartoonish visual style. Then the one episode that deals with twins goes absolutely wild and bananas, which I think really makes that episode stand out. Then episode 9 has a different visual style. Though I will say that the big problem I had with the last episode is that the story that it tells is very similar to Anakin and Padme's story from the prequels. But I will say that I thought the Village Bride episode and then the Ninth Jedi episode were fantastic. They were easily my favorite episodes of season 1 of Visions. And I did not dislike any of the episodes here. I thought all of them were at least good. I didn't think any of them were bad. I just thought some were better than others. But the final thing I'll say here is that one of the big things that makes this series stand out is that these stories are not canon, meaning that they don't actually take place in the Star Wars galaxy. This is the first time that we got a non-canon series. I think that does really make Visions stand out. But moving on now to number 3, we have Bad Batch. Now, to be clear, I'm only including season 1 because season 2 is not over yet. New episodes are coming out on Disney Plus. After all the episodes have dropped on Disney Plus, then I'm going to factor in season 2. But looking at season 1, I thought it was good but not great. I like that we get to see the early days of the Empire's reign, when they were still using Venator class Star Destroyers, V-Wings, and so therefore this is the time when the Empire was still using Republic era vehicles. Also, I like that we saw the Galaxy transition from using Republic credits to using Imperial credits. I like seeing that early transition between the Republic and the Empire. I liked that we got to see Kamino again, along with the scientist Nala Se and Prime Minister Lama Su. I like that we learned that Omega is actually, just like Boba Fett, a pure genetic, recreate a pure genetic copy of Jango Fett. Obviously, the only difference is that Omega's female, whereas Jango Fett's male. But aside from that, she is an exact replica of Jango Fett. This means that she is basically Boba Fett's sister, and therefore there's an interesting question that arises, which is, does Boba Fett know that he has a sister? I liked that right at the end of season 1, we saw Tipoca City on Kamino being destroyed. That's very powerful, considering that we spent a good amount of time there in the Clone Wars. I liked some of the members of the Bad Batch, like Hunter and Omega. The others were not bad, but I thought that Echo was really underused to the point where it was easy to forget he was even there. Wrecker is a likable character, but rather one dimensional in season 1, as he never moves beyond the good natured muscle of the group who's not all that smart. And then Tech is also not bad, but throughout season 1, he never moves beyond the very book smart, but not always street smart member of the group, the very technically smart member of the group. He always just hits that one note throughout the season. Also, I thought one of the episodes here was pure filler. When it comes to one episode where the Bad Batch gets stranded on a moon, I thought that part of the episode was completely unnecessary. You could have easily cut that out and not missed anything. The other part of the episode with Crosshair was really good. I think Crosshair is actually one of the most interesting characters in this show, and that applies to season 2 as well, because I thought the one episode of season 2, episode 3, that had Crosshair in it was absolutely fantastic. But moving on now to number 2, we have Star Wars Rebels. Now, the reason why I placed Rebels above Bad Batch season 1 is that the highs are pretty high, because I thought that Kanan and Hera were really good characters. Kanan's sacrifice is really powerful. Ezra, Sabine, and Zeb weren't all that interesting at the start, but I thought those characters became much more interesting as the show went on. I like how the show did gradually get a bit darker as it went on. I thought this series handled returning Clone Wars characters like Rex, Hondo, Ahsoka, Maul really well. I thought Ahsoka's duel with Vader was really powerful. I like the way that this series concluded Maul's story. I thought that the inclusion of the Loaf Wolves, who say the name Caleb Doom, Kanan's original name, and seem to have the ability to teleport, was really interesting. Seeing the world between worlds was interesting, though admittedly I am not a fan of introducing time travel into Star Wars. And yes, Dave Filoni has tried to say that the world between worlds is not really time travel, but I don't agree with that. I think that it absolutely is time travel, and I do think that when you introduce time travel, you're just opening up a big can of worms. But at least for right now, the world between worlds is not very prominent in Star Wars, which I'm glad to see. Also, I think that with Ezra, there's a lot of potential for him to get much more interesting in the future. But I will say that not every episode of this show is great. There's definitely some duds. There's some episodes you could skip. But since Rebels is a 4 or 5 season long show, rather than only being 1 season or 2 seasons, I can cut it a bit of slack in that regard. But I will say that too often the Empire comes off as a group of incompetent clowns. There's a lot of Imperials in the show who come off as incompetent buffoons. There's definitely some competent Empire Imperials, for sure, like Vader, Tarkin, the Grand Inquisitor, but there's a lot of incompetent clowns as well. I also thought it was a mistake to kill the Grand Inquisitor off at the end of season 1 because he was actually menacing and intimidating, whereas the other Inquisitors come off as not very competent and not very intimidating. Also, I think Rebels does one too many times have characters break into an Imperial facility, usually by disguising themselves as stormtroopers or just Imperials in general. Also, I don't like how Rebels really perpetuates the decades long out of universe joke or meme that stormtroopers are just the absolute worst. Too often, Rebels portrays stormtroopers as just the biggest incompetent clowns ever, but I overall do like this series. However, coming in at number 1, we have the 2008 Clone Wars show. Now, admittedly, this show did start off a little bit rough because the 2008 Clone Wars theatrically released movie was not well beloved at all. I talked about this movie during my streams. A lot of people weren't a big fan of it. And then the first 2 seasons of the Clone Wars are a little bit inconsistent. There's good to great episodes in those seasons, without a doubt, but not every episode of those seasons is good to great. There's certainly some duds, but the Clone Wars becomes much better as it goes on. In particular, once you get to season 4 and onward, the show really picks up a pace and finds its footing. This series drastically improves characters like Anakin, Padme, and Darth Maul, who were not handled well in the prequels. It really expands the Star Wars universe a lot because we see a lot of different planets. We see various crime syndicates like the Pike Syndicate, for example. Also, this series really gives us a much better idea of what the Clone Wars was actually like. It does help to improve the prequel trilogy in hindsight. I think that the last arc of season 5, where Ahsoka ends up walking away from the Order, is just phenomenal. The Yoda arc of season 6 is phenomenal. The Siege of Mandalore arc, the last arc of the whole show, is just amazing. It looks so good visually speaking that it honestly comes off as a movie rather than episodes of a TV show. Also, the episodes that deal with Mandalore are great. The way that the Clone Wars takes the clones who were completely disposable, expendable in the prequels. When you watch those movies, you don't get the feeling that the clones are individuals, that they have their own personalities or anything like that. They honestly feel like little more than droids. But in the 2008 Clone Wars show, you see, no, the clones, despite being genetically the same, not only do they look different because they paint their armor differently, but they actually do have distinct personalities. They actually do have individuality, which makes it all the more tragic when you learn in the series that the clones weren't even responsible for their actions during Order 66, because the reason why they killed the Jedi was actually just because these inhibitor chips were placed in them. These inhibitor chips forced the clones to comply with Order 66, meaning the clones were actually victims as well. This is great, I think, because it adds a whole new layer of tragedy to Order 66, because you realize that, oh, this is so sad. The clones who fought alongside the Jedi for years were forced against their will. They were basically brainwashed or mind controlled into killing off their Jedi generals who they fought alongside for years, and in some cases, especially formed strong bonds with. It's so sad that throughout this series, you see the clones more and more become individuals, especially because Jedi like Anakin and Obi-Wan treated their clones really well and actually treated them as individuals, not just disposable and expendable soldiers. But then, right in the end, the clones' individuality, their humanity really, is stripped away or taken away from them. And then, when you get to Bad Batch, or right away, at the beginning of Bad Batch during season one, the clones don't come off as individuals anymore like they did during the Clone Wars. It's very, very tragic. But that will wrap things up for this video. Bye, everyone.